be a brighter day.
Raymond Zev Kahane, son of Rabbi Meir Kahane, and his wife, Talia, were the victims of a horrific, murderous terrorist attack this morning. They and their 6 children had been on their way from Jerusalem to their home in Tapuk. They first dropped off 9-year-old Meir David in the Talmud Torah in Bet El, and then shortly before reaching Ophrah, they were attacked with gunfire by terrorists who lay in wait near the Arab village of Ilan Yabrud. Their parents were killed, and the car veered off the road into a ravine. One of the 5 children was very seriously injured, and the others, ranging in age from 10 years to 2 months, are also hospitalized. The family had spent the Sabbath in Jerusalem, but decided to return this morning and not last night when it would be safer. Relatives are seeking a woman who can nurse the baby. Shock and mourning is the order of the day in many circles in Israel. The Yashar Council lays direct blame for the double murder on Prime Minister Barak, and I'd have to say that's true, and Foreign Minister Ben Ammi. A council statement of today reads, Ehud Barak and Shalomon Ben Ammi are personally responsible for the innocent blood that was spilled this morning. Every minute that these two chase after Arafat and conduct negotiations with the murderer, Dalan, they give a green light to terrorism and encourage the murder of Jews. Our blood has become free for the taking, and we are paying the price for it. Now, let's remember the Jewish people. We sit here in a nation apparently very secure, we think. But keep in mind, we've got the same situation and imbalance of society, just like Israel has. We've got a big percentage of our society as modern and leftist as it is in Israel. And if we was to ever have such a thing in a nation that has as many millions of people, you would really know then what these poor Jews are having to go through. Here their politicians is wanting to sell out the nation, their heritage, their belief in God, just in order to have peace with the leftist side and the Arafat, PLOs, and those of the Arab world. And the way it's beginning to look and line up, this can't go on much longer. But what somewhere there has got to be a settlement of the whole issue. I would hate to think that innocent families and children have to live the rest of their lives constantly fearing for their life each day, never knowing what tomorrow might bring. And so let's keep them in our prayers, and may God somehow or other change this thing and begin to put it where it's supposed to be. I have to believe that what's in the Bible concerning it is the truth. It's just a matter of time for it to reach the moment when God will take it in charge, and he will begin to set it in balance the way he wants it to be. Now this morning, you all know the subject that we're on, but the message, I'm preaching it, and we're sending it to the Messianic Jewish people. I know they've heard from different sources in years gone by, especially if they've heard anything about William Branham, what he taught, and any of the critics of William Branham, what they have said in the light of serpent seed. Now, in order to do this message justice, we have to establish first that Adam and Eve, created by God, and we brought that out in the message last Sunday, how this was all brought about, and that he planted a garden eastward in Eden. Now keep in mind, the word Eden itself is not the name of the garden, it's the name of the geographical spot that lays between the Nile River and the Tigris River, and there it gives the other dimensions there. And these rivers are, we will say, the outer bounds of what was the geographical Eden. And it says that God planted a garden eastward, meaning in the eastern area of this geographical area. Now, the garden that he planted, I'd like to keep in mind, and for people to stop thinking that God came down with a hoe in his hand, with a great big sack on his, hanging over his neck, and pulling out seeds and doing this, going down planting a garden. That's the way man pictures things in the type of garden that he will plant, but that's all related to a plant life structure. But the garden that God planted eastward in Eden had nothing to do with plant life at all. It's a little bit of heaven, a little bit of the spirit world. God opens up, and he overshadows that geographical spot. And this was to be the beginning of man's origin as he has been created by God and put here on earth, to start the repopulation, the replenishing of the earth, restoring it back to a livable, inhabitable environment, where that the animals that God will make to be the helpmates of man can function in their God-created purpose, that the whole picture might truly be a beautiful thing beginning to transpire. This was to begin the beginning of a new era that was to replace what had ever went on in the old prehistoric world of time. We got as far last Sunday that this creature called the serpent, I tried to bring it out, hoping that I brought it out in the right way. He was not a son of God. He was just the highest form intellectually of what was then known as the animal kingdom. But he was an intelligent creature. Now we can see a little trace of this when scientists of today will take chimpanzees, baboons, and creatures of that description. There is an intelligence there, because man has been able to teach them creatures how to ride a bicycle. Well, you have to have a sense of balance to be able to sit on the seat of a bicycle and pedal it around in an arena. And if you don't have that sense of balance, you will flop right sideways just as sure as you get on it. But a chimpanzee seems to be one of the most intelligent of that creature, of those creatures. I remember it's been several years ago. Down in Florida, a man took a chimpanzee, and he learned this chimpanzee how to drive a car out on the highway. And in this story about it, he would go out on the highway, and he had dual controls. He would sit on the right side, and he would control the car until he would get on the highway. And here's this little old chimpanzee sitting behind the steering wheel, and I suppose they've got him on a little seat of some kind. And here he is going down the highway. He's actually steering the car. And people began to look at this, and they reported it into the police. And I remember in the Reader's Digest where I read this, this lady said she was driving, and she come up behind this. And she seen this little head sticking up there, and she thought, what in the world could this be? So she moves out in the passing lane, and she moves up beside. Well, when she looked over to see the driver of this car, there's that chimpanzee, and he just opened wide his mouth like that, smiles at her, and she goes off the highway then to a telephone place somewhere, and she calls the police. And she says, you may not believe me, but says, it's the truth, I just saw it. There is a car out here on the highway, and it's being driven by a monkey. Well, when the police got a hold of that call, they radioed then a trooper who's out on the highway and told him, investigate, stop a car that's supposed to be driven by a monkey. Well, the trooper himself was not going to investigate this thing for fear that somebody was playing a joke on him. So he asked for a backup. So another trooper came to his rescue. And sure enough, this one trooper, he caught him behind this car. And he could see that little head. But he could see the other man, looked like he was sitting over there sound asleep, had a big hat pulled down over his head. And so he followed the car just long enough to see that the car was really under control. So he moves out, and he moves up alongside, and that little old chimpanzee, he smiles great big at this trooper. And finally then the trooper gives the red light for him to pull off. And the trooper then asks the man. The man says, well, I've trained this chimpanzee to do this, and says he knows exactly everything to do. He says, but I sit over here with another set of controls. He said, I can stop the car anytime I want to. Now, I told that, brothers and sisters, just for the sake of illustrating. Modern scientists have today been trying their best to look for the link between man as he is today and what they think was somewhere back of this prehistoric evolutionary process and advancement of modern man. They want to try to think that we have actually evolved up a prehistoric creature. And it seems as though that the only thing they can find that is close to it would be something like in a baboon or chimpanzee line. Well, that we know, brothers and sisters, is absolutely a falsehood. It's just the fact, the actual link, that if they want to look for it, they're not going to find it up there. They're going to find it down there and crawling around on his belly, eating flies and stuff like that. That's where the serpent went to. He's out there amongst that reptile family. We don't know which one he is, but the Bible says in Isaiah, I believe the 65th chapter, that in the millennium, that dust will still be the serpent's meat. So the serpent, the original serpent, when he was cursed, he's still out there. He's replenished himself, but in that cursed state. And there's no redemption for him. But in this original state, when we see him here in Genesis chapter 3, he was the most subtle. Satan knew that he could use this creature to get at the plan of God. Now, I'm giving a little background here so that we go on into our message this morning. And I would like to be able to inform the Jewish people. You may have heard a lot of stories, one way or the other, negative and such like. A lot of educated preachers here in the States have attacked this. And they use the approach, how could a holy God allow such a virtuous woman, Eve, to become a prey to such a perverted relationship like this? Well, now I have to say back to the educated, intellectual, whoever he or she might be. Whatever Eve did, she's the one that made the choice. Whatever she did, she was the one that begged her husband to eat of it also. And I have to challenge anybody, I don't care what education qualities they come from, what kind of word you use. When her husband did partake of it, it seems then that both of them's eyes were opened. And they knew then that they were naked. Now, if you're trying to prove somebody somewheres that plant life was the fruit that they have eaten of, then I have to ask you and challenge you. Why would it be then that they took fig leaves to make a little small item to cover their nakedness, which to them was not their mouth? It was the sexual reproductive organs of their body. Now I leave that hang as it is. You may think they're smart and intelligent, but when we come on into Genesis chapter 6, whatever this act was in Genesis 3 that caused Adam and Eve to realize they were naked, they tried to use plant life foliage to cover that nakedness, and God would not accept it. And the Jewish people know good and well that from the giving of the law by Moses through time, nothing in the plant life structure was ever used as an atonement for the sin of mankind. It's always been the blood of bulls and goats and stuff. With that in mind then, we have to then begin to accept the fact that the serpent was not a snake. He was not a creature that was a ventriloquist, meaning he could throw his voice. He was a creature that looked much just like the physical structure of Adam. But he's called a serpent because of his intelligence. He had a vocal capability of communion with Adam and Eve. That had to be, because God designed it to be a helpmate, a servant. Had that not have been, brothers and sisters, we might see today, had sin never entered the picture, I'm sure that we would all be living in a beautiful earth today with a spiritual realm about it, that we could see the spirit world, we could see angelic beings, and we could see the glorious side of the spirit world just as much as we could see the natural world. But nevertheless, when Adam did partake, they went and hid themselves. It's true, they tried to hide themselves behind plant life trees. They hid themselves in the midst of the garden because the spiritual realm and the natural realm was compatible. You couldn't separate the one from the other. So they hid. But when God comes speaking to them, finally Adam had to come out of hiding and admit what they'd done. Now last Sunday we covered the curse. The first thing that God curses is the serpent. He cursed him so that creature could never be used by the devil to do such a thing again. Then he comes to Eve, and you read that in Genesis, the 3rd chapter and the 16th verse. He began to curse the reproductive qualities of her body. And I ask the educated and the intelligent that want to be critics, if you're wanting to say then that she ate a plant life, why did not he curse her mouth? Why did not he say, you will have toothaches from now on? Why did he not give her just a set of rotten teeth? Well, you know, brothers and sisters, and I know, he never cursed her mouth. He never cursed a thing about her teeth at all. It was her ability to conceive. That's why you read it in Genesis 3:16. Now let us take a look at that. By now we've learned that one of these trees is the tree of knowledge. Of what? It's not math. It's good and evil. Good and evil in what relation? How to get drunk? No. It's how to use the intimate act between man and woman for the sole purpose of pleasure. And it's being repeated every day since then on the face of this earth. We got an absolutely society here in America today. They have no morals. They are without principles. They think every woman ought to be a prostitute. I read that in an article here not too long ago. Now, and when men will begin to advocate such debased, where did the knowledge and a thought like that come from? It has to come from the devil. So the knowledge for pleasure, bypassing that it's to be used only to bring forth children. That's why then when she has introduced it to Adam, and I have to say, Adam was cursed because he hearkened. When you hearken to something or other, it means that that thing has to be absolutely laid before you, not only just one time, 2 times, 3 times. After a while, you just get tired of it, and you give in. So that's what happened when Adam partook of it. So they ate of that tree, and they knew exactly that it was a relationship that could be used exclusively for pleasure. Now then when we come where God says, now seeing therefore that man has become as one of us to know good and evil, lest he therefore take of the tree of life and live forever in his sins. What does that mean, Brother Jackson? That means this. They already know what the fruit off of this tree is. And let me say this. It is not the man that says, now is the time. No, it's the woman. Now to explain this to the Jewish people who will listen to this video. I am a farmer. I've raised cattle. I've raised horses. I've raised sheep. Now I'm not comparing a human being to an animal. But I'll have to say the animal kingdom today is far more in principles of morality than the human race is. Because first off, Out in the wild, the deer, the female deer does not live, partaking of this relationship every day that she lives. Neither is the male. There comes a certain time of the year, and since they live in the wild, they're not domesticated. This female deer, she goes through a cold, dark winter. She's already supposed to be pregnant. She does not drop her and give her young at the 1st of December, the 1st of January. It's too cold. She's regulated by when the long, dark season of winter is over, and the sunlight begins to shine more brighter, getting closer. The rays of the sun begin to affect the pituitary gland. This begins to affect her physical reaction. And sometime in February, the last of it, when the days get longer and warmer and more brighter, or long in the 1st of March, that's when she will begin to relocate herself. If she's in a mountain region where it's cold, she'll begin to relocate herself into an area where it's much warmer, because she's getting ready to, we will say, give birth to this little fawn. With that in mind, it's the same way with the wild horses. It's approximately 11 months for a female to become pregnant. In the dark, cold days of the wintertime, the wild herds that are in the mountain regions and in the deserts, you don't see them breeding, mating, or anything. Usually the male's off to himself. The females are grazing. But when it begins to warm up, that's when they will drop their young. Then she will go for a spell. And when it comes time, brothers and sisters, for God to work through that animal kingdom to bring this recycling about, she will first wean that colt, and then she may go for many weeks or months. But then nature will set in her body, and you know good and well what I'm saying, a period. When that period begins to set up in her body, that's when she will begin to notice where the male is at. Many times she will begin to approach him. And she will never accept him for this relationship. Now, as I'm saying this to the Messianic Jews, brothers and sisters and friends, I try to speak this giving the relationship a sacred image. Every time I see a young couple bringing me a little baby to be dedicated, I look at that little package. I don't have to ask them, where did you get this? Such carnality, such demonic attitudes that modern man today has brought this relationship to. God designed it to be this way. That's why the language in the scriptures was first eat. Now then, our critics will say, but the Bible said eat, that means plant life. You're wrong. I said, you're wrong. Because in the garden, yes, they ate of it. That's the language. But when God drove them from the garden, lest they partake of the tree of life and live forever in their sins, outside, then when we will say the genealogy of the line starts, the word eat don't even occur no more. It's new, which is a past tense verb of know. Now, absolutely again, I have to say, God let the language itself explain itself, speak for itself. But each time we begin to see a change, a drop-off of something, it lets me see man is losing his grip on the knowledge of the sacredness of this relationship. I have to say, as I'm preaching from God's Word, I can't see a holy God designing some mixed up, mess up relationship to bring life into the world and that let mankind sit around and debase it as they've done in your X-rated theaters. How many understand what I'm saying? With that in mind, we have to acknowledge the fact God designed this relationship between one man and one woman to reproduce himself, to reproduce life on the planet. And had that relationship never been marred, scarred, debased, my opinion, the language eat would still be the language that we would speak of it today. But no, it changed its structure. And it goes to show, brothers and sisters, as I've got it all written down here, as we come through periods of time, down through the ages, it just goes to show how much further man is getting away from the original picture, the original language terminology that this relationship was spoken of. So getting back, brothers and sisters, to the tree of life. Had Eve told that serpent that day, hey, look, and whatever his name at that time might have been, you get out of here or I'll tell Adam. And then when the time was right, in her body would set up that period for that sole purpose of carrying on a relationship with Adam. Then when she would have come to Adam, she would not have had to beg him. She would have said to Adam, honey, it's time for you and I to express ourselves in love, that we might bring forth another little child. However long that period would have lasted, 2 to 3 days, God knows. And let me say this to the female world, Jew or Gentile, you would have known exactly when to begin to carry on this relationship. You would have known when it's time to stop. That would have been long enough for your body to conceive seed. And as you would have stopped carrying on any kind of relationship, there would have been no knowledge for pleasure outside of this purpose of God any more than there is in that female, in that male horse and the female horse after it's over. Now, I'm not the greatest horse raiser that's ever been. I want you to understand that. I don't even express it in that purpose. But from 1968 to about 1982, I've had 5 different male stallions on the farm through the years of time. At various times, I let the females all run with him. And I have to say, that male horse has got more sense than we've got a lot of principals in our colleges today. That's a fact. Anybody that's raised cattle, you could have absolutely a herd of female cattle. I'll have to say the male cow, you usually see him hanging to himself. That's why I have to say that relationship, the eating of the fruit off of the tree of life, would have never been known to be just for pleasure. No, it's for to bring forth and reproduce your kind. With that in mind, now then, that's why then, after Adam and Eve have done this, they're inside of this beautiful environment of heaven, that's when God says, seeing therefore that man has eaten of the forbidden fruit, and he's become as one of us, to know good from evil, and lest he take of the tree of life. In other words, there's no such thing as God creating a world environment that you could do wrong one day and do the right the next day and get by with it. It just don't work that way. So that's why then, brothers and sisters, and God drove man out And he put at the entrance to this beautiful paradise, in the east of it, angels with flaming swords. Now the natural-minded, carnal-minded person would try to conceive or get the idea. Well, that garden must have been a little spot somewhere with a wrought iron fence around it. It was a little bit of heaven. And as man lived inside of this environment, he knew just exactly, brothers and sisters, what part pertains to the spirit world and what part pertains to the natural world. Because the natural world, he could see the trees, that the roots all fasten into the ground. He could see the fruits of them. But that's why I challenge the critic. These two trees did not grow out of the ground at all. They grew in this spiritual realm. So as God placed this environment down here on earth, here stood these beautiful trees. They're symbols. But in the spirit world they existed. One is the right, and the other is the wrong from the right. And that's why God had to drive him out of that beautiful environment. You just cannot live in heaven and live in sin at the same time. It just don't work. So with that in mind then, God drove him out of this beautiful environment. And I've said this so many times. Did he change positions geographically on the earth? He did not. When I have to say God lifted the heaven, yes, it sounds like he literally drove him out of a dimension or a geographical spot to take place in another geographical. He just lifted the heavenly, we will say the atmosphere, and the angelic beings was proof. No man from that day to this will ever wake up some morning and he can see heaven just right before him. No man has ever seen it in that light. Now we go back to the curse that fell on the woman. He cursed her periods, which would be multiplied now. I have to say this. God never cursed the periods of a female horse. He never cursed the periods of a female cow. She has hers at a certain time of life to be able, we will say, to conceive seed, to become pregnant, to bear forth another little calf. It's just that simple. But when God multiplied the woman's conception, he multiplied her periods. And with that is sorrow. And how many times young women, when that period of life sets in their body, there's a day or two there, they go through all kinds, we will say, emotional stress. It affects the nervous system. I realize maybe not all women are that way. But there is some women that affects that way. And same way then in giving birth. We realize this in the animal kingdom. There's a certain amount of pain that has to be involved in being able, we will say, to expel the birth from the mother's body. But that don't mean that the person is brought to the door, threshold of death. I've watched cows give birth, horses give birth, sheep give birth. Once in a while, yes, and I have to say it's because the devil, he's got the animal kingdom still under his control today. But bypassing that, most of the time, brothers and sisters, the cow will go off to herself, the female horse to herself, and they'll give birth to their little foal. Same with the sheep. And you don't hear them crying and screaming and carrying on. I never forget one time when the wife was in the Croydon hospital. I forget what child it was that she was ready to give birth to. There was another young woman in there with her. And they had done taking my wife to the birth room. And it was a young man, the husband of this young woman. He come out and he says, "I understand you're a preacher." I said, "Yes." He said, "I wish you'd pray for my wife." Just about that time, I could hear the poor soul. The room they had her in, that poor soul was just screaming from pain and the agony. Well, I had just been in to see my wife. I watched my wife go through some of these episodes of pain as it hits her body. I could see the expression on her face. I said, "Lord, just help my little wife." But I never did hear my wife scream. But that poor woman, she screamed. I know she was in pain. And when you think, brothers and sisters, when Rachel gave birth and died outside of Bethlehem is the tomb where they put her to rest. Rachel's tomb. She died giving childbirth. That's happened to many women down through the ages. But I'm thankful to God one of these days in the millennium that old dirty devil's going to be bound. And they won't be nothing like that no more. Now let's go on. I hope my listeners, both on the Jewish side, can understand. Man was never left in the garden to eat of the tree of life. Now, where's the tree of life today? It's still in the garden, but the garden has been separated. Because you will find this, brothers and sisters. Let's turn to Revelations right quick. You'll find this in the 2nd chapter and in the 7th verse. This is to the Ephesian church age. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. Now in that first Gentile church age, and in 96 AD, the Lord is now speaking to that church. To him that overcometh, that means in that hour, overcome the things that Satan is throwing against him, trying to defeat him, to destroy his faith and his confidence, his victory. To him that overcometh those things, will I give to eat of the tree of life. Where is it at? Which is in the midst of the paradise of God. That ought not to be hard for anybody to understand. It's still in that heavenly environment. Now then the critics will come up. Oh, now, Brother Jackson, we really got you. You just think you have. Yes. If that environment would have stayed here on earth, every child would have been born off of a perfect relationship to this tree. There would have never been no need for man to have been redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. And there would never been no need for Jesus to say to Nicodemus, except a man be born of water and of the Spirit, he can in no wise see the kingdom of God, nor enter into it. So what did Jesus mean when he said that to Nicodemus? Because in the natural realm, we're all born off of this tree. And where's this tree at if it's plant life? Somebody tell me. I challenge you, critics. Go find it. It don't even exist in the ground. You know where it's at? It's in your brain. Oh, now wait a minute, brother. I said it's in your brain. Well, how come it's in my brain? When God told Adam, Eve was still inside of him. And God planted that garden, and then he took the man and put him there. Now, Adam, you can eat of every tree of the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That was put in his conscience. Listen to me. It was put in his conscience. But then when God made him a helpmate, and he put a sleep upon him, and he took from him the spirit side of the female woman, and then the bone and the flesh to form the body, did God ever tell her what she could eat? And no. She woke up with the conscience of it. That ought to tell people something. That's why when the serpent came to her, he didn't go to Eve. Adam, no, he came to Eve. Hath God said? And she said, yes, God has said. Because she had a conscience that knowledge was. We may not eat of that tree of knowledge, good and evil. For God has said, the day thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Well, if Eve had that knowledge of it, then I have to say, do you think I'm so all twisted up by saying, you're born with the knowledge of the tree of good and evil? 6 for pleasure. Come Come on, Professor Fosdick. Dean Know-It-All. Now, I'm not against an education, but God have mercy. We got a bunch of these nuts today. Do you know what? If time would last long enough, there is a philosophy right now. We want to rid this world of this cursed environment. One man and one woman. I read it. That marriage is evil. Now I have to yell it like this to let people know I'm not ignorant. I read once in a while. So I know what I read. And no later than yesterday afternoon, I'm coming through a TV series. You know, we got a lot of these so-called critics. Here's a man and here's a woman. She's supposed to be a conservative, he's supposed to be a liberal. And I pause it there long enough because I've seen them advertised before. And you know what kind of subject they're on? I hear this man, looked upon by American society as a brilliant man, but he's a leftist. He's so far left, if you don't care, if you're not careful, you're going to fall off of a cliff one of these days. What was he saying to this woman? He says, I don't see nothing wrong with one man and a woman when they both have consensual attitudes. If they want to start living together, as long as what they're doing in their living is not, we will say, obstructive to anybody else's lifestyle, bringing hardship to them. He said, I believe they ought to be able to live together without having to go through this rigmarole of ceremony. And I thought, yeah, there's a man right there with a brain that's done been sold out to the devil. And you're educated in America, and there's a many young students sitting there. Well, I don't see anything wrong either. It's all because God has been taken away from you. The knowledge of God. No wonder they fight over the Ten Commandments. And I have to say, bring them back. It's the only thing yet that tells man, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. On and on and on. But no, we don't want to remind people of those things. And then that brings them to another news article. It shows a bunch of girls into one of these here video shops. And they got these little toy pistols, you know. You boys know what I'm talking about. You can shoot at these make-believe targets. And guess what? They was asking Professor so-and-so, do you think it's right for girls to do this? He says, no. He says, I don't think it's right. He says, I think it presents the wrong picture and image of things. I thought, you silly man. You silly man. When I was in the 4th grade, is there a camera in here that will get me if I get down in the aisle? Borden, Brother Pixley, 4th grade. I had a little cap pistol. And it's long about the last of November. Well, you know how it is in school. When school starts, usually when the weather is real nice, you're out playing marbles. Then from that it goes to something else. So finally we got the idea we wanted to play cowboy and Indians. So there was a lot of us boys, we brought our cap pistols there. But we weren't supposed to bring no caps. So in our 15-minute recesses, we're up in the woods playing cowboy and Indians. Well, it went on for 2 or 3 days. I don't know what happened. Finally, then the teacher told us one day, he said, now, there'll be no more guns brought to school. Says this cowboy and Indian stuff is over. But we didn't take it serious. We brought our guns anyhow. I was wearing overalls back then, Brother Pixley. So I brought mine and I had it in under my overhaul bibs. But you know how some boys are. Jackson, will you take charge of my gun? Well, will you take mine? Oh, Jackson, he just always liked to help his friends and buddies. I must have had 5 or 6 or 7 cap pistols in under my coat, and it zipped up. And I go into class. And the teacher says, now then, we're going to have an addition problem this morning. And so he asked so many of us to get up there. When the first thing he said, Jackson, what are you doing with that coat on? Sir, I'm cold. Are you sure? Yes, sir. He never made me unzip it. But when the first recess came, I was not too long getting them boy. Hey, here. Now, my brothers and sisters, my point is this that I'm bringing out. It never made crooks out of us. It never turned none of us into a gangster. Because in home, in church, once in a while a preacher would come to school and give us a lesson. Because he was a chaplain in World War I. And he told how that on the field of battle in France, they're out of ammunition. He's left to wander. He found a lone cavalry horse. The ground is frozen. The mud has been so deep. And he's walked over this thing looking for a morsel to eat. He found this old cavalry horse. And he held on to that horse's tail. And somehow or other that horse seemed to know where to go. And that horse led him out of there. I thought to myself, he says, it taught me to put your trust and your faith in God. He says, I learned it on the battlefields. When I was hungry and I was weak, I couldn't hardly walk. But we've taken God out of the picture. When you take God out of everything, that makes you want to get rid of guns. Well, why don't you get rid of the butcher knives? I would rather be shot than cut to pieces by a knife. It's a shame, brothers and sisters, we got a society like it is today. I never intended to bring that little illustration, but it just fits in. Back then, brothers and sisters, it was not a sin. It wasn't evil. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year the teacher would say, let's all stand and repeat the Lord's Prayer. Did this make Christians out of everybody? No. Did it make critics out of everybody? No. But I never heard one boy nor one girl complain by going home and saying, I have to say, all of that has come about in the last 50 years. And I'll never forget coming home on that troop train in January 1946. Here's this literature. The communists had put it out. We will destroy America from within, and they've done it. They've done it through means that you never thought it could be done. They've done it. They've taught stuff in our schools, brothers and sisters, should have been left in hell. We could have got along without it. And when they started this rotten dealing of sex education, we didn't need it. Because in the knowledge of every young person born in a society where they have access, Every young boy, every young girl, listen carefully to me. If you was to have been left alone to grow up and face your future, your society, after a while you'll begin to hear older people saying certain things that start your mind to work. I'm trying to say this, brothers and sisters, in a way to let you know the devil has taken this relationship between a man and a woman that's supposed to be looked upon as a sacred relationship to bring life. Well, now that it's off of the tree of knowledge, yes, man and woman was ordained then to live in pleasure. And I've got a lot to say about that too. When man was put outside the garden, there's been no female woman from that day to this that knows when she can carry on a relationship and be free and not get pregnant. Oh, now wait a minute, Brother Jackson. I said, yes, listen to me. Why do you have so many young people going today buying birth control pills? What are they for? It's what you don't know that will suffice the question. Does that answer it? But young girls and my sisters, both of the Jewish realm and the Gentile realm, from the day that Adam and Eve was pushed from the heavenly environment, they've walked from then with a knowledge of this relationship for pleasure. She has never known. Yes, there is an approximity time, possibility time, but it's all guesswork. So they live in pleasure. Oh, down through the centuries of time, we've had these religionist fanatics. Somehow or other, they looked into the sacred scriptures and said, oh, but sex is evil. I don't want nothing to do with anything that's evil. So they get a revelation and they get a teaching. They want to become celibate. We've had them in the Gentile realm. We've had them in the Jewish sections. Take in England. Take the Puritans. Many of the Puritans lived in we will say, a twisted up idea that this relationship should not be carried on only just to have children. Yes, and there's many a husband and wife live together, never realizing that they was torturing their passions and their wills to leave each other alone unless they wanted a child. Then you had the Quakers come along. Then out of the Quakers came the Shakers. And the Shakers produced an element of celibate people. Down in Kentucky, over here on the border of Illinois and Indiana was another camp of them. And neither one exists anymore. Because God never ordained that man and woman in the natural healthy state live as a celibate. And I have to say that teaching the Catholic Church has taught is out of the pit of hell. And I have to say, there ain't been no pope that's lived a celibate life. And no none that's lived a celibate life. If you get some of these nuns that would tell their testimony, like some of them that has been able to escape the thing, they could tell you a lot, brothers and sisters. But I'm not standing here to preach that either. But now then, if you've got the picture that the eating of the tree of life itself would have been a relationship, never knowing the pleasure side only, would have been strictly to have relationship and then to have offspring. Now then, let's move on. Let's go to Genesis chapter 4. Yes, outside the garden, that's when the two children were born. But it starts with the relationship that they had at first. It says, and Adam knew, K-N-E-W. That's a past tense verb for he know her, which is a present tense. And she bore twins. But remember, brothers and sisters, only one of these sons was the son of the act that Adam had committed. The first child that was born was Cain. That was the son of that serpent creature that had approached Eve to begin with. Therefore, Eve duly conceived. Now, whether it comes from the Jewish side of criticism or the Gentile side, it doesn't matter. I've got in my files case after case after case that's went on here in the last number of years. One in France, different ones all over America, one particular case in Florida. Young women having a relationship with two different men within, we will say, a short interval of time. And they conceived duly. I know the one in Florida. It was during one of our political conventions down there that this young woman, they wrote the article about it. She had a relationship with a political white man. Then she had a relationship with this Chinese man. And you know what? When she got pregnant, she gave birth to an Anglo-Saxon child and a Chinese child. Now, don't stand up and say, well, it can't be so. There it was. I got it on files. That's exactly what happened in the garden. And the Jewish people ought to realize, nowhere in the whole genealogy of Adam that later came through Seth that you will find over in the book of Matthew that traces you right back to the offspring of Abraham. Abraham then goes right on back then into Seth. Nowhere does it ever say that Cain was a son of Adam. Cain was the son of the serpent. Now then, that gives us a start then to start looking at the serpent seed. It tells you here in the 4th chapter, it gives you, starting in the 8th verse, it tells you how that Cain, finally he slew Abel. Then he fell under such a conviction. Finally he could not stand it any longer. So then in the 16th verse, and Cain went out from the presence of the Lord. In other words, it goes to show he could not stand it. Knowing what he was, he had killed a man. Now then, and he went over to the land of Nod. Well, geographically, this would put us over somewhere around in the country of Iran today, looking at it from the eastern side of the Garden of Eden. And it says there, and Cain knew his wife. Now, when you trace that, brothers and sisters, you come on down. Here is the record of 5 generations, from Cain down to Lamech. When Lamech is born, the 5th one here, he took 2 wives, polygamy. Now, my purpose in bringing out this Cainite line here is to show there was things that the devil began to multiply and genetically produce in this Cainite offspring bunch, because here is polygamy. Then there's another one where Lamech he had to kill in self-defense. So it's murder again. We find also that one of these fellows, he became a great musician. And then another one, he became, we will say, a worker in brass and iron. I have to say, he's typical of our modern industry of today. Now that doesn't mean that I'm casting in reflections off of people that work in a steel factory. Forget that, brothers and sisters. But somebody had to think up something other to do with iron and steel. I mean, with iron and brass. But in all of this, in the beginning of the Cainites' genealogy, it carries you through 5 generations. Here's polygamy, here's murder. And I have to say, brothers and sisters, this one kind of a fellow that he was a professional in the organ and all of that kind of musicians. Well, I have nothing, brothers and sisters, against music. I don't think that's the part that is played here. But in this Cainite background, there was nothing that's ever recorded that God even elaborates in. It's something other that the serpent, the devil, has multiplied genetically. Now, for the sake of the Jewish people that will be listening to this, keep in mind the first book in your Bible, your Torah, is called, in our English word, it's the book of Genesis, which means the history of the genes. It's not the history of the apples, nor the history of the oranges. It's the history of the genes. Now, that's not named that way just for mere nothing. So we can see here then, and I have to associate this fellow something like with some of our modern hip beat, Elvis Presley and that type of musicians. And you know, I can think of Bach and some of those kind of symphony type musicians. But when Elvis Presley came along, he had a style, he had a way about him, brothers and sisters. It just tore every type of music that had been up to that hour. It just tore it all to pieces. And look what it did to the young people. When he would get on a stage, and thousands of young girls would go hysterical, almost wanting to rip their clothes off and throw themselves at his feet. People, don't tell me that there can't not be evil presented in music. There are those that designed it strictly for that. And when we've got these hippie type characters today, they call it this hard rock music. Every bit of it, the beat, the sound. And I've listened to it just as you pass and listen to the stuff. Them's not musicians. Them's noise makers. How many knows what I mean by that? It's one thing to play a guitar, but it's another thing to get up and bong. Bong. Turn it up loud. Bong. The other night we was going down 131 here and got down there by that red light and stopped. And there's a car come up behind us. And it was a cold night. But he had that music turned on, a bong. It sounded like the top of that car would come off. And I thought, bong, bong, bong. You could hear it everywhere. And I thought to myself, when that poor fellow gets about 60 years of age, he'll be wearing a hearing aid. Because natural instinct is for the ears to begin to want to shut out some of that excess noise. But here they drive up and down the road. Bong, 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 beat, beat. And I've read this, brothers and sisters, in Reader's Digest. Dairymen have experimented with music. They have put music in the dairy barn where they put the milkers on. And they have that classical music, or we will say home-like music, something or other. The cows, the minute they start, they just get so relaxed and the milk just comes down. But they put that hippie beat on, bong, 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 and the cows stand there, they whistle. They just clam up. Well, I would too. Now, young people, I heard a young person say, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. That lets me know your brain has been beat to pieces. Been beat into smithereens. Well, it all started from the Canaanite line. And I have to say, look what Elvis did back in the 50s and is with us today. And he has given birth to dozens of groups just like him. Even now then they try to get it in the church. Boom. I like when I hear a guitar, I like to hear a distinction of notes once in a while. All right, so much for that. Now then, when we look at this serpent seed, how far are we going to carry this? There had to be a reason why the devil, over in the land of Nod, he worked on these offsprings of Cain. Yes, there was young women born in that line. You don't read anything about them actually how they wanted to serve the Lord and love the Lord and worship Him. No. They were strictly earthly, materialistically, just socialistically minded creatures. Anything was okay with them. Well, it went on for quite a long while, brothers and sisters, but to hurry up and get to the basis of the story. Finally, we go back to the genealogy of Adam. God gives him another son and it's called Seth. Then starts the line of Seth. We come down to Enoch's hour, the seventh from Adam. When Enoch is born, he began to grow up. And as he began to see the picture of society was in his days, from over in the land of Nod, these young female creatures, they were the daughters of men. Now keep in mind, them creatures in the land of Nod were men, but they were not sons of God. Let's get that settled for a fact. They were not sons of God. They were daughters of men, and they were sons of men. But the devil seen that he's going to throw something or other at Adam's line again. Now here came these young daughters of the men line. Beautiful, it says. Fair to look upon. Now we pick up the picture of it here in Genesis 6. It goes along with Enoch's revelation from the seventh from Adam. And Jude wrote about it in his hour. He's seen how the two sides was beginning to mingle and mix together. And when he's seen that, Enoch prophesied, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints to execute judgment in the earth. Because he's seen what was taking place. Now then, so we're in chapter 6. And in chapter 6, the critics will always say that it wasn't a sex act back in the garden, but they'll have to admit here there was a lot of sex in this. And it came to pass when men, that's the Cain line, began to multiply. Well, they were supposed to. On the face of the earth. And daughters were born unto them. Yep. They had daughters over there just the same was on the sons of God's side. Because it says that Adam begot sons and daughters after the death of Abel. Now verse 2 says that the sons of God, that's the Zethite line, still living in Eden, saw the daughters of men. Wonder how came. Wonder how come they saw the daughters of men. Well, here's, brothers and sisters, where you have to fill in between the pictures. I have to believe, brothers and sisters, that the daughters of men, the Canaanite line over in the land of Nod, there was so much violence, they did not know what real love was. Everything was a perversion. Hate, fussing, lying, fighting. Wasn't nothing for a man to haul off and just knock a woman down. You're my wife. I'll make a slave out of you. Now, you know, brothers and sisters, I have read in magazines how in some parts of the world men have taken the attitude that they have a right to whip their wives. I don't read that in the Bible. Now listen to me. I read from the Apostle Paul, who was a Jew, writing to the Gentile church. He says it like this: husbands, love your wives, even as your own body. Wonder what that means. How many knows what it means? Oh, Carl gets up one morning. I got a headache. Oh, I just hurt all over. His little wife goes to the medicine cabinet. Well, come here, honey. Oh, what you got to say about it? But a good little wife, come here, honey. She sets him down. Now you wait. So she goes and gets him a drink of water. Or if there's something other that's anti-pain or something in the medicine cabinet. And she comes and brings it to him. Honey, you take this now. And he takes it and he looks up and he says, thank you, honey. Now, some people would like to call me a sissy. If you do, I'll call you a bulldog. And you ought to be shot for claiming to be a believer in Jesus Christ, a Christian. No, Jesus was not no sissy. But I can't see him coming to be married to a Gentile people, which is his wife, and him expressing such hateful attributes. How many knows what I'm saying? And when I think of the Apostle Paul, a lot of people think he was never married. I have to believe in his younger life he was. Otherwise, he could not have wrote 1 Corinthians like he did. So with that in mind, brothers and sisters, these daughters of men, they begin to venture across the land from out of the borders of Nod into the land of Eden. They'd heard it said that the men over there was really wonderful. They loved their wives. And I realize, brothers and sisters, it's 12 o'clock. So I'm just going to hold it right on that subject tonight. And start with that tonight. Because there's a lot went on in this 6th chapter of Genesis. Because here's where serpent seed really starts. Genetically reproducing itself. So may the Lord bless you. Heavenly Father, take these words, Lord. I pray that they have been expressed, Lord, with appreciation to you, Lord, that created us and put us in this earth to fulfill a purpose. I thank you, Lord, for a people that you placed here. I appreciate my brothers and my sisters, the young people that grew up here, Lord. Lord, bless their lives. Grant to them, Lord, each one the great desires of their prayer life and such. And whatever time is left, Lord, keep us true to you, that we can live and walk, Lord, clothed upon in your righteousness. Now, Lord, we ask this all in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.